The CEO thought firing me in 5 minutes would erase me. What he didn't realize was that I built the payroll system his entire company depends on. This Monday, at 7 a.m., 3,000 employees will open their pay stubs and find nothing. That silence isn't a glitch. It's the start of a collapse they can't stop. I'm Laura, and if you've ever been underestimated at work, you'll understand why I stayed quiet. Keep watching, because the deeper this goes, the more expensive it gets. Subscribe, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this story travels. The firing took less than 5 minutes, but the humiliation burned far longer. Ethan, the CEO, didn't even look at me when he said the words. "We're going to let you go, Laura. Security will walk you out." Sandra, the CFO, leaned back in her chair like she'd just checked off an item on her to-do list. They called it restructuring, a cleaner word than erasing. My badge was scanned at the lobby, my laptop pulled from my arms, and a security guard guided me to the door as if I might grab a stapler and rebel. What they didn't realize was that their surgical removal wasn't complete. In their rush to get me out of the office, no one thought about the small silver key still clipped to my lanyard, the key to the server room. I didn't need access to their Slack channels or executive calendars. I had the skeleton key to the one place that actually mattered: the racks of servers humming like heartbeats in a locked fluorescent-lit room. Every Monday at exactly 7 a.m., Payroll ran its batch through the code I had written line by line year after year. 10 years of patches, safeguards, and authorization trails built to survive glitches, audits, even cyber attacks. They thought an intern could replace me. Ethan even said it once in front of the board, half joking, half serious. Payroll is plug and play. Any kid out of college can run it. I smiled then, but only because I knew the truth. The entire system was wound tightly around my credentials. Without my authorization key, Payroll was just a machine with no ignition. And now, I was gone. As the security guard pressed the door open for me, I caught a glimpse of the office I had held together for a decade. Rows of gray cubicles, the scent of burnt coffee, the low murmur of employees who would expect their checks in 3 days without ever thinking about the invisible hands making it happen. That was the cruel irony. They erased me, but the system still remembered. Outside, the air felt heavier, like the world knew something was about to break. Ethan thought firing me was clean. He thought one meeting with HR ended my story. But all he had done was set a timer. And when that clock struck 7 on Monday morning, 3,000 people would find out the cost of believing I was replaceable. For a decade, I was the person nobody noticed until something broke. I wasn't a face on glossy presentations or a voice in strategy meetings. I was the quiet one, hunched over screens in a server room that smelled like dust and ozone, making sure payroll never faltered. Every bonus check, every tax withholding, every health deduction ran through code I had stitched together, often late at night while others were home. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the backbone. They called me just IT, as if those 2 letters erased the fact that the company's lifeblood, money flowing in and out, was built on the framework I designed. The first time I realized how invisible I was happened during a board review. Sandra, the CFO, had been asked how secure our payroll infrastructure was. She didn't hesitate. "It's automated," she said, waving her hand like she was brushing crumbs off a table. Then she laughed and added, "Any intern could run it." The room chuckled with her. I sat in the corner, silent, because there was no point in explaining that the so-called automation was me, that the safety nets, the redundancies, the emergency protocols were my fingerprints hidden in every line of code. They didn't know that the system could cross-check state labor laws, flag misfiled deductions, and even shut down fraudulent vendor payments. They only saw a dashboard with green checkmarks. The truth was more complicated. The payroll system wasn't just a program, it was a spiderweb. each strand connected to another, stretching across compliance, banking, insurance, vendors, and employee records. If you cut one strand, the others strained. If you removed the central anchor, me, the web collapsed. I had built it that way for a reason, not out of malice, but out of necessity. The company had grown sloppy. Ethan's leadership was about speed and shortcuts. Sandra wanted numbers she could present without questions. So, I made sure the system demanded thoroughness even if the people running it didn't. My authority wasn't in a title or an office. It was buried in the architecture. And that's why, when they escorted me out, they thought they'd won. They thought I was gone. But you can't fire the wiring. You can't erase the ghost in the code. I had become the system. And the system didn't care about office politics or boardroom banter. It cared about authorization, about integrity. And when Monday morning came, it wouldn't recognize Ethan or Sandra or Marcus. It would only ask one question. Where's Laura? The last thing I did before leaving wasn't dramatic. No big speech, no slammed doors. I simply logged into the payroll system one final time, navigated through layers of menus that no one else ever touched, and removed my authorization key. Not deleted, just parked it. Like turning a car off and slipping the keys into my pocket. From the outside, nothing looked different. The dashboard still glowed green, the interfaces still opened, and the executives still believed everything was running as usual. But underneath, the ignition was gone. Payroll could try to start its cycle, but without my credential, it was like pushing a button on a dead battery. For years, I had been the one reminding them that authorization wasn't just a box to tick. It was the lock and the key. Every payroll file, every vendor payout, every insurance premium was stamped against my digital signature. It wasn't ego. It was structure. And now, with me gone, the structure was hollow. I didn't have to break anything. I didn't have to sabotage code or slip in malware. All I had to do was stop existing in their chain of trust. By firing me, they'd done most of the work themselves. They cut the visible cord but left the hidden wires intact, wires that always ran back to me. Ethan didn't notice because he never looked. Sandra didn't notice because she never asked. Marcus didn't notice because to him IT was background noise. That was the flaw. When something works too well, people stop thinking about how fragile it really is. As I walked away from that building, my badge already deactivated, I knew they believed the system was theirs now. But Monday morning was coming, and when payroll reached for the switch, it wouldn't find it. It would stall, blank, and wait for a ghost who wasn't on their payroll anymore. Monday morning arrived like any other, at least for them. For me, it began before dawn, coffee cooling on my kitchen table while I refreshed a private dashboard I still had access to through a back-end monitoring tool. At exactly 7 a.m., the system reached for the payroll batch, just as it always had. At 7:01, it stalled. At 7:02, the rejection logs lit up in red. Authorization missing. By 7:05, 3,000 employees across 5 states opened their portals to find blank stubs staring back at them. No deposits, no totals, just empty lines where pay should have been. Phones buzzed, emails fired, people refreshed screens like gamblers pulling a slot machine handle, hoping the numbers would appear. They didn't. By 7:10, managers were scrambling, messaging finance, forwarding screenshots of authorization failed like they were reporting a fire. By 7:30, Sandra's phone was flashing nonstop, the CFO drowning in calls from panicked department heads. And me? I was sitting in my car parked across the street from the building, watching executives rush inside, spilling lattes and pulling at their collars as though running faster could fix a missing key. They thought it was a glitch, some temporary hiccup that IT could patch with a reboot. They didn't realize what had really happened. The payroll machine wasn't broken. It was waiting for me. I imagined Ethan, the CEO, trying to keep calm, telling his people it was just a systems issue. I could almost hear him soothing Marcus, the board chair, saying it would all be handled by noon. They'd believe it because they had to. But the system didn't care about optimism, it cared about authorization, and there was no substitute for mine. By 8 o'clock, employees were posting in group chats about mortgage payments, rent checks, daycare bills. Panic doesn't take long to spread when money goes missing. By 9 o'clock, HR inboxes were flooded with complaints, some furious, some desperate. How am I supposed to pay my landlord? Is this legal? I can't cover my prescriptions without this week's check. Real lives, real needs, all hitting the wall of a system that had been stripped of its backbone. Sitting there in my car, I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched, calm and steady, because I knew this was only the opening act. The longer the system sat idle, the more pressure it built. Like a dam holding back water, every hour added more weight. And when the cracks widened, the flood wouldn't just wash over payroll. It would spread into everything connected: vendors, insurers, banks, regulators. They had laughed when they said any intern could replace me. Now, every screen in the building was proving them wrong. And I didn't need to lift a finger. By noon that Monday, the payroll collapse had already cracked the company's foundation wide open. It started with frantic calls from managers demanding answers about blank stubs. By the time Ethan and Sandra had gathered their all-hands-on-deck team in the glass conference room, the damage had already leapt beyond employees. Vendors who were expecting automatic transfers flagged non-payment within hours. Automated alerts triggered red locks on accounts, blocking shipments and halting services. One vendor even posted on LinkedIn about non-compliance with payment terms, a digital whisper that spread like fire in a dry field. By 1 p.m., the health insurance carrier had suspended coverage because the premium payment bounced. Employees calling in about missing paychecks suddenly learned their prescriptions weren't covered, their doctor visits invalid. The same people Ethan once bragged about keeping happy with perks were learning the perks had been smoke and mirrors. Sandra, scrambling to manage optics, told the board it was a temporary processing delay. But banks don't run on spin. At 2 p.m., one of their primary lenders flagged the payroll discrepancy and froze the company's line of credit pending resolution. That single freeze turned cash flow into a desert. Bills stacked up instantly. Contractors demanded upfront payment. Even the cleaning service refused to step into the building without clearance of overdue balances. By 3 o'clock, the Department of Labor had opened an inquiry after being hit with a wave of complaints from unpaid employees. Some were polite, some were furious, others sounded desperate. Parents trying to cover rent, workers terrified of missing childcare costs, people who depended on steady pay to survive. The government doesn't care about company excuses. It cares about compliance, and compliance was now flashing red. Ethan tried to buy time. He stood in front of staff in that glass room, gesturing confidently, repeating phrases like "systems issue" and "back online shortly." But confidence doesn't pay mortgages, and words don't stop regulators. Every passing hour multiplied the collapse. Vendors imposed penalties, insurance added surcharges, the bank demanded collateral, employees threatened lawsuits. Marcus, the board chair, hammered the table in a call with Ethan, demanding to know how a routine payroll had exploded into a full-blown disaster. What he didn't realize was that it wasn't an explosion. It was a suffocation. The safeguards I had built over a decade were doing exactly what they were meant to do: refuse authorization without proper credentials. Ethan had cut me out and assumed my absence didn't matter. Sandra had rolled her eyes at the redundancies I insisted on, calling them paranoia. Marcus had dismissed every presentation I gave as technical noise. Yet here they were, trapped in the cage those redundancies had built. The irony didn't escape me. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I hadn't touched a line of code since they fired me. All I had done was stop existing in their chain of trust. They destroyed themselves the moment they underestimated the invisible architecture they never cared to understand. By the end of the first day, the company wasn't just fighting employee outrage, it was facing regulators, vendors, insurers, and bankers. Every one of them demanding compliance proof that no one in that building could provide. The dominoes were falling faster than they could catch, each one toppling another, until the spiral was no longer a glitch or a delay, but a full-scale systemic collapse. Watching from the outside, I realized this was the real revenge. Not fire, not fury, not sabotage, but inevitability. By day 2, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. At first, it was unknown numbers, then blocked calls, then finally names I recognized. Ethan's private line rang at least 5 times before I silenced it. Sandra left voicemails laced with false calm, promising to revisit my role if I'd just call her back. Even Marcus, the board chair who once called my reports paranoid bedtime reading, tried his hand at charm, offering me a consulting package with discretionary bonuses. They all sounded the same: frantic, performative, hollow. They weren't reaching out to fix what they broke. They were begging for a lifeline I no longer owed them. I let every call ring out. Every voicemail stacked up, unread. They had chosen arrogance over respect, and now they were choking on it. By day 3, the panic turned official. The Department of Labor froze all company accounts pending investigation. Thousands of employees who had already missed one paycheck now faced empty promises and bounced transactions. Vendors cut ties. Insurance carriers locked coverage. Banks walked away. The company wasn't a company anymore. It was a crime scene. Ethan tried one last play, sending me an email through his personal account. No subject line, just a single sentence. "We can undo this." I stared at it for a long time before deleting it without reply. Because it wasn't true. There was no undo. The safeguards I had built were airtight, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. They had been designed to prevent fraud, mismanagement, shortcuts. The very sins Ethan and Sandra committed daily. And once triggered, those safeguards didn't negotiate. Watching from the outside, I realized how much power silence holds. Not action, not sabotage, just silence. By refusing to answer, I let the system speak for me. It was louder than any accusation I could ever make. Their downfall wasn't explosive, it was suffocating. Every door closed at once, every account frozen, every regulator circling like sharks around a wounded vessel. They weren't pleading with me because they wanted me back. They were pleading because they finally understood the truth. I had been the backbone, and without me, they had no skeleton left to stand. By day 5, the wreckage was complete. I logged into the shadow copy of the server logs I still had access to, not to interfere, but to witness. The payroll system had run its full cycle, each failed authorization stamped, dated, and archived with ruthless precision. Every ignored compliance flag, every bounced insurance premium, every frozen vendor payment, packaged neatly and shipped straight to regulators. The government didn't shut them down. That would have been merciful. Instead, they did something far worse. They placed the company under permanent monitoring. From that day forward, every payroll run, every vendor payout, every financial transfer would be scrutinized. Millions would bleed away year after year just to prove they were safe. They weren't a business anymore. They were a specimen under glass, poked and prodded until the last of their credibility withered. Ethan's empire was reduced to paperwork and oversight. Sandra's boardroom swagger dissolved into silence. Marcus's threats carried no weight under the shadow of federal regulators. I didn't destroy them. I didn't have to. I simply stepped back and let the system do what it was designed to do: suffocate anything that ignored its rules. Sitting at my kitchen table, tea cooling in my hands, I felt no triumph, no rage, just a cold steadiness. They had tried to erase me, to label me replaceable. But the system still carried my fingerprint, hard-coded and immovable. Their downfall wasn't revenge, it was inevitability. And the best part? It would never end. Every quarter, every year, the reminder would return in the form of audits, fees, and frozen approvals. A silent monument to the woman they underestimated. The backbone they broke, only to discover they couldn't stand without. They thought I was disposable, a ghost in the server room, someone whose absence would barely register. But arrogance blinds people to the truth. The invisible hands that keep things running can also let it all collapse, slowly, silently, until the weight crushes everything they built. Looking back, the lesson for me wasn't about revenge, it was about recognition. I learned that being underestimated isn't always a weakness. Sometimes it's leverage. The same people who dismissed me as just IT couldn't see the network of responsibility I carried on my shoulders. When they cut me out, they thought the system would adapt. Instead, it reminded them who had truly been holding the threads together. In life, especially in American workplaces where speed and flash are often celebrated over quiet competence, it's easy for people to overlook the backbone roles: the teachers, the nurses, the IT staff, the bookkeepers, the night shift workers. We mistake visibility for value, but the truth is, the unseen backbone sustains everything. That means two things. If you're the invisible one, your work matters more than they acknowledge. And if you're in power, you must respect the people you think you can replace. The moral lesson isn't about burning bridges, it's about letting arrogance face its own consequences. I didn't need to destroy the company, I just let the safeguards speak louder than I ever could. That was enough. How to get started today. Write down one area of your work where you're the unseen backbone. Remind yourself of your value. Take one small step to protect your leverage, whether that's documenting your processes or keeping a personal record. Show quiet respect to someone else whose work gets ignored. They may be the reason the whole system stands. If this story made you reflect, drop a comment about your own workplace experience. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to keep these stories alive.